say anything and snuggled up close to her, and they drifted off to sleep. When Marla awoke, she saw from the clock on the DVD player that she had slept some 3 hours. It was early afternoon. She had placed the TV on mute when Jim called. It was still on, showing a movie or something with a car racing around banging into things. Ginger was scratching at the patio door to get out. Marla found the remote and switched the TV over to a news show where people were screaming at each other about something. She didn't want to know what. She kept the television muted. She got up and let Ginger out into the backyard and went to pull a Diet Dr. Pepper from the refrigerator. Then she heard angry barking coming from outside. "Baby," she yelled. Marla dropped the Dr. Pepper onto the kitchen counter and went out the door. Ginger was at the edge of the yard, frozen, staring at the privacy fence. Barking was coming from the other side of the fence. A nasty Brindled Pit Bull lived over there. "Ginger, get in here." Ginger didn't move, growling maybe. The barking and snarling, more than one dog, Marla could tell, went on. "Ginger!" Marla went out and crossed the yard in her bare feet. The afternoon was hot. Even the grass felt hot, and the peonies planted along the back of the fence were wilted under the gray, hazy sky. The barking beyond the fence was growing, snarling, growling. Ginger's teeth were bared. She stood trembling, staring at the fence until Marla yanked her up and held her tight. There was movement on the other side of the fence, a dog fight. Marla stepped over to peer through the knothole, but a giant pale shape, a dog, slammed into the fence, and she jumped back. Ginger was wriggling in her arms. "Hey!" The dog on the other side of the fence sounded like it was trying to chew through the fence, to attack her, to get Ginger. Then it sounded like there was another dog over there, and maybe another. The anger radiating through the wooden fence was incredible. Marla took another step back. Ginger was growling. "Be quiet," Marla said. Ginger struggled to get down out of her arms, so Marla turned and went back to the house and dropped Ginger inside. The little dog tried to shoot out, but Marla blocked her with a leg and slid the patio door shut. Ginger looked up at her through the glass. The dog noise from next door grew. 2 or 3 dogs. A dog fight. Marla slowly crossed the lawn and stood next to the fence. It was shaking. Marla placed her hand on the rough wood. She could feel the vibrations of snaps and growls transform, not just hearing them now, but feeling them. She looked through the knothole. Nothing. Marla put her foot on the bottom of the fence and pulled herself to the top and looked over. She saw 2 big dogs, strange dogs. A white one and a brown one savaging the Brindled Pit. "Stop it," she yelled. "Hey!" The Brindled Pit was in a corner trying to protect itself. The other 2 dogs, also pits, Marla saw, big ones, were going after the brindled dog. The brown one at his flanks, the pale one going for the throat. "Stop it!" The dogs ignored her. Marla dropped down from the fence and ran to the gate at the edge of her backyard. It was locked. The fighting dogs sounded like they were going crazy. Marla crossed to the patio and went inside the house, pushing Ginger out of the way, through the living room and out the front door. She ran to the house next door and rang the bell. There was no answer, so she banged on the door of her fist and yelled. The house was dark. She was pretty sure the people were away. She didn't know their names, had only seen them occasionally. Brown-skinned people from Pakistan or Mexico or someplace. People who wore nice clothes, had a nice Mitsubishi and a big Ford Excursion. They had that Brindled Pit, too. But a lot of people had big dogs. Sometimes when Jim went running in the neighborhood rather than down by the lake, Marla could tell what block he was on by where the dogs were barking at him. Though now, someone's big dogs were loose and have gone after the brindled dog. They could have gone after a child if there had been children in the neighborhood, or if one had been on the street. Marla looked around. All the houses on the block were blank looking, just closed off, with small windows on the front and recessed doors, big houses of stone or brick that almost filled their lots and seemed to push forward with 7-foot privacy fences crowding up behind them. It was a good, new neighborhood. People had to have good jobs to live out here on the far edge of town with their big dogs and big cars, and apparently everyone was off their jobs now, for nothing was moving. The dogs were still fighting. Marla ran back to her own house and went inside. Ginger was waiting for her by the front door. "Stay," Marla said as she crossed the house and went out the back, but Ginger followed her through the house to the sliding patio doors and stood and watched. Marla went to the side of the house and began pulling at the water hose. She'd maybe spray water at the dogs, get them all wet and make them stop fighting, when there's a quick pause and the dog noise from next door. Then a growl, a snap, and then silence. Marla dropped the hose and went over to the fence and listened. She thought she might be hearing the panting of tired dogs. She pulled herself to the top of the fence and saw the brindled dog dying, sprawled out in the sun, bleeding, trailing guts, a hind leg twitching. The brown dog and the creamy one were in the shade next to the house, resting, panting, pink tongues lolling, looking over at her. The creamy one had what looked like blood on his face and neck. Marla watched the dogs for a long time before she dropped off the fence and went back into the house. In the evening after work, Jim came over and let himself in. He brought her a bottle of wine and cans of chicken soup and a couple of movies to watch. Marla was still drowsy, disturbed, as he was unpacking. She got herself a glass of water, and she almost didn't notice when Jim stepped over and opened the patio door to let Ginger out. No! Marla jumped over and slammed the door shut, almost catching Ginger in it. No, she said. Ginger only goes outside of a leash now. Only with a leash. Baby, Jim asked slowly, are you okay? Fuck no, I'm not okay, Marla said. She pulled Ginger's leash down from a hook and fastened it to the squirming dog's collar. She noticed her hands were shaking, and she frowned up at Jim. Don't just stare at me. Go fix some soup or something. Outside, the evening was quiet and warm. Car sounds came from the distant expressway. Marla walked Ginger past the yard's sole tree, a lonely mesquite, tugging Ginger at times, the stubborn little dog not used to a leash in her own backyard. Then Marla went back and tied the leash to the tree. Marla left Ginger and touched the fence. The wood was warm and motionless. No sound came from beyond it. Marla pulled herself up and looked over the top. She saw a black lump in the center of the yard, a dark lump close to where she had last seen the dead Brindled Pit. There was no sign of the cream-colored dog or the brown one. She was sure they were gone. The house beyond was still dark. All the other houses in the neighborhood were dark. Nothing moved. Marla? It was Jim, standing out on her patio. Marla, are you okay? Is something wrong? Everything's wrong, Marla thought. But she didn't say anything. She swung over the fence and came down into the backyard next door. The dead pit was in front of her, a few feet away, and in the dark it seemed to move. Marla took a step toward it. She could hear Jim calling, Marla? Marla! And even though he sounded like he was just on the other side of the fence, she didn't answer. She heard Jim say, Ginger, what's wrong with your mommy? Marla focused on the dead dog stretched out on the ground. Maybe it moved again. Then it did move. It wasn't dead. The hind leg sort of kicked or scratched or something, and Marla knelt down beside the dog, and she touched its shoulder and said, poor boy. Then the Brindled Pit wrenched around and snapped her by the wrist. The next afternoon, Marla went to work. NTEC's headquarters were in an office park located on the top of a canyon on the far west side of town. And from the parking lot, Marla could look down at the flooded river below, Lake Austin, and the Loop 360 bridge crossing it, and beyond the bridge, the towers of the city. There were 2 boats down below her on the lake towing water skiers, and a few golfers strolled around at the country club course just downstream from the bridge. People at play under the hot white Texas sun, she thought. Texans at play, and the thought made her angry. It just seemed to gloss over something incredibly crude and vulgar. And above her, vultures rose, floating on the updraft from the water, while grackles strutted around the parking lot, picking at bits of trash. She turned her back on them and went inside. Marla passed the security desk and the silent newspaper reading guard and took an elevator up to the 3rd floor. She walked down a long, open room, passing several empty, sterile office cubicles, and other cubicles occupied by bored or depressed-looking people, cubicles that were soon to be empty. Her boss, Conrad, was standing outside his office door. He had a real office instead of a cubicle, an office with a door and a window, and he saw the bandage on her forearm, and he asked, are you all right? But she walked past him like a zombie and took her chair at her desk. Some weeks before, Jim had given her half a dozen little plastic frogs to put on her desk to cheer the place up, and 3 days earlier, in a playful mood, Marla had arranged the frogs in a long, humping daisy chain of sexual frolic. Now, though, Marla looked at the happy frogs, and she sighed and said, well, shit.